And that's why you always leave a note. Anyway, I'm Layman Pascal, and you're listening to the Cinematic Asylum on CILU 102.7 FM in the shadow of the sleeping giant. Today, we're slipping dangerously into altered states and altered stages. Or, who knows, maybe we're not slipping, maybe we're already at the bottom and we're climbing dangerously up the ladder of altered states and altered stages. On the other hand, because you never know with metaphors, maybe we're already up the side of some burned-out Icelandic volcano covered with little purple flowers, and we have to keep climbing, but soon we'll get to the ring and go over and slip down, and maybe it'll just be solid, or maybe it'll be bubbling with lava on the cusp of a dramatic explosion of altered states and altered stages. Wait, what?
Seh ich dich mit einer anderen Freundin? Wie lang glaubst du, sag mir, bin ich dann noch dein? Die Stiefel sind zum Wandern und wird's mir mal zu dumm, gehe ich eines Tages mit den Stiefeln auf dir rum. Mit den Stiefeln auf dir. Lieber Freund, verbrenn dir nicht die Finger. Du marschierst schon lang im falschen Schritt. Ha! Ich hab einen anderen heute gefunden. Yeah! Schön und schick, da kommst du nicht mehr mit. Die Stiefel sind zum Wandern und wird's mir mal zu dumm, geh ich eines Tages mit den Stiefeln auf dir rum. Stiefel, seid bereit?
That was Eileen covering Nancy Sinatra's These Boots Are Made for Walking. Today we're talking about states and stages. States and stages, as you probably already know, are a classic way of making a subtle distinction in terms of developmental philosophies and theories of everything. Duh. They also get called waking up and growing up, which is catchy but possibly a bit misleading, and we'll get into that later. Right now, you should just sit back, relax, and hold in your mind the complicated distinction between states and stages as best you understand it at the moment. Wait, what? States are like stages of consciousness, man. You move in and out of them. Waking, dreaming, sleeping, seeping, flow, happiness, boredom, ecstasy, depression, anger, fractal madness, seeing a UFO, pausing quizzically, getting verklempt, quivering, and all the rest. Stages, on the other hand, are like different cognitive operating systems. The DOS and Windows of worldviews, rungs on a ladder, geological or archaeological layers, floors in a house, types of values that emerge over the course of an individual lifespan, the history of a species, or the history of life on Earth, or not just on Earth. It used to be that some people, you know who I'm talking about, certain people, wink, didn't know or didn't want to know the difference between states and stages. They sort of assumed or asserted that you went through all the normal stages of human neuropsychological and social maturation, and then a couple extra stages that looked an awful lot like states for some reason got stacked on top. Does that make any sense? Let's go through that with a bit more texture. Babies show up and they have this stage where they're kind of like jellyfish. They're kind of helpless and built to float and flop around and wiggle their tentacles in all directions. They don't have conscious thoughts and memories the way we normally think of those things, but eventually they go through a phase shift, they get control of their muscles, they start walking around and mimicking speech and pointing at things. It's a big deal. It's like a whole new creature. The brain waves change, the body shape alters. One day, all of a sudden, they're using whole sentences and have reproductively capable sexual organs, and the next day, they're reflecting with a critical eye upon the structure and implications of their socialized personality. Around age 20, the prefrontal cortex comes fully online, and we all feel a bit less stressed about them driving cars, leaving the country, and buying intoxicants. For most people, these are the kind of basic stages of life, and then it's all downhill. Unless, of course, you were to keep growing internally for some reason, or have a so-called midlife crisis and get yourself another partly new personality, at least internally. You get the idea. Stages of life are a very natural concept. We are all instinctively familiar with these phases. We're just unsure of how far these stages might actually go. In the old olden days, the later better stages were thought of as a transformation into a spiritual or religious life. Some 60-year-olds finally leave the family cigarette business in Delhi and go off to join an ashram or live meditatively at the Shiva temple in the nearby mountains. Did they level up? There seem to be these possible stages that keep going on past normal, modern, Western, adult, average personality. But they're subtler, trickier, more difficult to test in the lab. They don't overtly change the shape of your body, at least not as dramatically as the shift from, say, kid to teenager. Although they might change your habit, your diet, your clothes, and who knows, maybe your pancreas looks different. It's hard to tell. Maybe your cells start to glow in the dark slightly now. Or maybe you start getting a more expansive, more nebulous, more ethereal approach to life in general. You suddenly get into religion or start spending a lot of time on bike rides or beaches contemplating the higher things of life for some reason. You were never really interested in cosmology and evolution and existential mystery before, but now it seems like you're reading and watching a ton of stuff that might formerly have been the domain of religion and mythology. A lot of your old convictions now seem half-assed and not quite true anymore. You don't really feel like a body, and somehow you seem to be a shiny internal vibe that's basically the same as you were when you were a little kid. You're becoming subtler. And maybe it keeps going. Identity gets bigger. You become trans-subtle. You seem to exist as pure consciousness in a void of eternity. And then one day even that drops off, and now your so-called pure consciousness is located everywhere in everything, and you can't tell it apart from anything. And people say, nice weather we're having, isn't it? And you say, yes, I am. Thank you.
Lord, I'm gonna away, darling. Honey, don't you wanna go? Oh, you know I'm going somewhere you ain't never been. Oh, you know I'm going down to the river, baby. I must sit down on the ground. Oh, you know I'm going down to the river. I must sit down on the ground. I'm let the waves of the water, let the waves of the water, honey, baby, wash my trouble down. Oh, I'm getting slow, baby. I can hardly rest at night. Oh, you know I'm getting so darling. You know I can hardly rest at night. I know my baby, she ain't treat me right. I believe when I tear my hood. You know I'm going down and down, down. I believe I'll tear my hood. Lord, I'm teasing brown. I declare days of day blue.
At the tone, 3 hours, 21 minutes. Coordinated universal time.
Minute detail. It takes a holy life. It takes motions. It takes dedication. It takes dedication. It takes a death. And only God can allow it. And you couldn't do it if you're not the seed of God. And so the path through the great corridors, these are corridors unto his perfection, that is, which the prophet, the Urim and Thummim, has penetrated. That through this great sea of blackness, that I penetrated through these corridors, and I went through that last segment where I went through these dark serpentines. I passed through that corridor where they sit, where they are. And when you penetrate to the Most High God, you will believe you're mad. You will believe you've gone insane. But I tell you, if you follow the secret window and you die to the ego nature, you will penetrate this darkness. Oh yes, there's many a man or woman that's been put in the sane asylum when this has happened to them. And they're sitting there today. People think they're insane, but they saw something that's real. And they see it when they're on drugs. The only thing is they see it not through the light of God. And the way I showed you, I showed you to see it through the light of God and the understanding of God. Because when you see the face of God, you will die. And there will be nothing left in you except the God-man, the God-woman, the heavenly man, the heavenly woman, the heavenly child. There'll be prayer on your lips day and night. There'll be a song of jubilee waiting for your king. There will be nothing you will be looking for in this world excepting for your God. This is all a dream in death. And so I went through that with you. I encountered hell and the great serpentines of the highest order. And I went through that when I showed you Charlie in the dream. The question is asked in Urim and Thummim concerning the pit. This horrible pit of miry clay. In Urim and Thummim you can ask me a question. If it's asked from the right being or the right soul out of Urim and Thummim, I can give you unspoken words that's never been spoken. It's not even in your Bible yet. It does clarify what's been spoken in the Bible.
That was Mississippi Fred McDowell, followed by Godspeed You Black Emperor. We were talking a moment ago about what it would be like if you put some altered states of consciousness on top or at the end of the ladder of normal developmental stages. You'd go through all the normal stages, and then you'd work your way through subtle causal and non-dual consciousness, more and more ephemeral and abstract. We could call them anything we wanted. The terms subtle causal and non-dual are sort of borrowed from theosophy and other early 20th century brands of westernized Hinduism. So yeah, you could keep growing into altered states of consciousness after you reach normal human adulthood, but it's not a good idea. I mean, doing it is a good idea. Go ahead and explore altered states of consciousness. But stacking the states on top of the stages is a bit hanky. Hanky, I say. And why so? Well, think about it. These different states of consciousness, visionary, empty, blissful, etc., are always with us. Little kids go in and out of these states. Drug gobblers go in and out of these states. In fact, with enough jiggering or a lucky stroke, you might slip sideways into an energetic vision of the pure isness of things at any damn moment. So they don't really show up later in life as the result of spiritual maturation. And what's more, the old way of imagining it, with normal mortal bodies at the bottom and disembodied light beings above us in the nebulous beyond, and the inconceivable God above that, and the union of that God with all things above even that, well, it's kind of perverse in the sense that it makes more and more abstract things seem better and better than particular things. There's no special reason why living organisms should have the lowest value and completely disembodied things should have the highest value. Why would changelessness be better than change? Why would the absolute be better than the relative? Why would up be better than down, immortal invulnerability better than mortal vulnerability? You see what I mean? There's a bit of an anti-life pathology at work, which is not surprising when you think about the way that sensitive organisms were treated in the ancient and often brutal cultures, out of which a few saints and sages developed for us these ideas of altered states and stages. And speaking of altered states, that's a 1980 American sci-fi horror film based on the novel by Paddy Chayefsky. Heavily influenced by the true story of Dr. John Lilly, who changed people's state of consciousness by putting them in a sensory deprivation tank with psychedelic drugs and making them talk to dolphins, which is awesome. The film Altered States marked the cinematic debut of both the vivacious Drew Barrymore and the charming Alexander method enthusiast William Hurt. In the movie, Dr. William Hurt concludes that we are handicapping ourselves by limiting our idea of reality to the information we get in the normal waking state of consciousness. The great mathematical philosopher Lord Alfred North Whitehead made the same point years earlier. It is in fact extremely unlikely that the only valid way to perceive reality is awake, adult, and sober with a head full of serotonin. If you really wanted to be a realist and gather information about the whole real universe and what it's actually like, you'd probably also need to know how it's perceived by sleeping children with heads full of dimethyltryptamine or schizophrenic turtles or dizzy surrealists. Copernicus once helped us get over the small-town fantasy that the Earth is the center of the universe. But we may also have to get over the parochial dullness of mind that makes us think our regular state of consciousness is the center of the universe, or even the best tool for perceiving physical matter with. That's a completely unjustified supposition. So anyway, Dr. William Hurt moves on from flotation tanks to ayahuasca, as we all do sometimes, picking up on aboriginal hallucinogens and tinkering with them in the lab, combining them with deep sensory isolation. At first, he starts to see things and think in even more different ways than Steve Jobs, but pretty soon it's having unusual physiological effects. He describes himself as being reconstituted, and, wouldn't you know it, a radiologist discovers that the good doctor now has the skeleton of a gorilla. He's regressing, de-evolving. His deep neurogenetic and psychedelic experiments have tapped into some primal well of DNA patterning that overrides the surprisingly shallow morphology of modern man and regenerates him into the lurching proto-paleolith that constitutes the longest and perhaps most normal stage of our ancestral development. He becomes a primitive with a brain full of visions and escapes from the lab into the night. I'm not sure how the movie ends because at that point in the film, I always tear my clothes off, howl into the Bacchic void, and dive out through the window, loping down the street, trying to get the full experience. You get the idea, though. The movie Altered States begins with states and ends with stages as the good doctor passes back down the ladder of emergent forms of human neurophysiology.
Look, that ain't out yet.
No, it's not out yet. Got a real short one?
Yeah, what is, let me see.
Just a little teeny. We got lots more, though. Don't worry.
See, huh? Look yonder. Look yonder. Look yonder. Where the sun done gone, but I can't hold 'em. Wow, I can't hold 'em. Wow. Wow, I can't hold them no way I do. They gotta go mine. Ah, they gotta go mine. Ah, they gotta go mine. And way above her knees and look yonder. Wow, look yonder. Wow, look yonder where the sun done gone. Old and dine, ah, old and dine, ah, old and dine. She can't say a word and it's look yonder. Wow, look yonder, yay, look yonder, where the sun done gone. I'm gonna leave you, oh, I'm gonna leave you, ah, I'm gonna leave you, and I don't care what you say. Look yonder, wow, look yonder, wow, look yonder, where the sun done gone.
Let me see if you can get your power. Tears of joy like a meteor shower. Let me in your fortress. Come and meet me in your fortress. Let me see if you can get your power. Tears of joy like a meteor shower. Let me in your fortress. Come and let me in your fortress, baby. Ooh, your fortress. Ooh, 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 ooh. Oh yeah, come and let me in your fortress, baby. Ooh, your fortress. Ooh, 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 ooh. Oh yeah, come and let me in your fortress, your fortress. Your fortress.
That was Lead Belly and Coleman Hell, and this is Altered States and Stages on the Cinematic Asylum on CILU 102.7 FM. And I'm Layman Pascal of God, or Layman Pascal de Deus, as I'm known in my spiritual compound in Brazil. It's right next to John of God's compound, although the word compound sounds a bit pejorative. Would you rather be molested on a lovely piece of property in sunny Brazil or on a compound? Compound. Yuck. Still, the situation isn't totally about phraseology, it's about states and stages. This guy, Joao de Deus, or John of God, has two very interesting things widely reported about him. The first thing widely reported about him is that he can perform psychic surgery by allowing various spirits to incorporate into his body and on his metaphysically potent piece of land. The second thing widely reported about him, eventually, is that he and his close henchmen have been pretty much operating a sexual abuse factory for years. It's one of those things where you don't immediately want to believe accusations just because they were made, but golly, there's a lot of them. And it sure seems like regularly awful stuff was going on with naive young people coming for healings and blessings, and also maybe with young members of John of God's own family. Now, I'm not saying that everyone named John is a pedophile. I'm surprised you even thought that. What I am saying is that the overall situation here is very complicated. Now, you could try to get rid of the complexity by deciding that either he was a predatory sociopathic con man all along and there was no magic, or that the charges against him are false and trumped up, so to speak. Now, you might be right in either case, but the situation for me that's worth thinking about deeply is the situation in which there is both spiritual healing and interpersonal abuse. That's the tricky thing to try to get your head around. Or really, the question might be, why do we even feel surprised or vexed by the conjunction of those two things? Do we really expect that people who have extraordinary gifts are necessarily or even likely going to be good people? Assume this guy goes into altered states of consciousness and some subtle entity comes through and performs a real healing on your body or your heart, maybe even opens your mind to new layers of reality. Is that any reason to think this is a trustworthy individual? We might be understandably grateful for the healing, but does that mean we put them forever into the category of friendly, safe, and honest? Would it shock you to hear that a regular surgeon turned out to be an embezzler, whatever that is? It's important to separate states and stages because a person who can access a particular state of consciousness, no matter how impressive, might not necessarily have also gone through the very many basic human maturational stages. We kind of get starstruck and assume that amazing things are also likely to be good things, to which we should therefore surrender ourselves. But amazing is different than good. Goodness might be like wisdom, something that grows in us over time from certain kinds of efforts and sacrifices, whereas amazingness can happen to anybody at any time and probably only for a while. Is a preacher or yogi master who speaks convincingly about God and pumps out a tangibly impressive energy into the room more or less likely to be morally underdeveloped than a cab driver, elementary school teacher, or that woman who's running Disney-controlled Star Wars franchises into the ground? Probably not. At any moment you can laugh. Some people are better at accessing that state of humorous delight than are others. That's great. But even the laughingest infant doesn't leap past toddler straight to adult because of that uniquely radiant capacity to feel into and stabilize extraordinary delight. States are one thing, stages are another. We all sleep and we all dream. We all focus on solid things sometimes and unsolid things at other times. You could get real good at focusing on unsolid things. You could become the world's greatest focuser on unsolid things and set up a center in Fiji where people come to hear your instructions or just get high from being around you. But that's not the same as being at a higher state of human, spiritual, or moral development. You might still be a prick.
But not the Jaguar.
CILU is supported in part by the students of Lakehead University, our sponsors, and our listeners. At this time, we would like to thank the following sponsors for their continuous support.
The Outpost, Lakehead University's pub, full-service restaurant, and live music venue. Find them on Facebook to stay up to date on all the happenings during the school year, like Taker Tuesdays and Pub Night Thursdays. Campus Tech, located in the tunnels across from Lusu at Lakehead University. They are the only Apple authorized service provider in Northwestern Ontario. They also offer educational pricing on dozens of items, as well as a wide selection of computer and gaming accessories. Stop in and chat, or check out stock and order online at campustech.ca. The Argus, Lakehead University's student newspaper. Available on Wednesdays during the school year, around campus, around the city, or online at theargus.ca.
The power of the reptile finally prevails.
He's looking like a sailor who hasn't a ship. Same salty song and curled up lips in the land of the brave and running out of vein. Waiting for a guy silver-eyed like a bullet train. Kinda wishes that he would show up, 'cause it's all become a
The Growlers with Vacant Lot, followed by a snippet of Dr. Hooch from Do Make Say Think. I'm Layman Pascal, and we're wrestling with the greased pig of states and stages today. It's a mess. What do higher states, post-normal mutations of human intelligence, look like if they don't exactly look like the amazing altered states of subtle causal and non-dual consciousness reported by saints, mystics, and philosopher sages throughout history? Well, that's hard to say. Ideally, we're hoping to see something like more wisdom, more beingness, a greater appreciation of reality both on the vast scale and in small affairs, a revolution of values, ideas that are hard to appreciate at first but slowly grow on you, an integration of greater ranges of perspectives, more sympathy with the suffering, but also more general contentment. And what about psychic powers? Well, that's pretty common in sci-fi cartoons where people are accelerated forward in their evolutionary potentials. In the X-Men and Deadpool universe, people with particular genetic codes can be activated into idiosyncratic new capacities as a result of how they internalize certain stresses and intensities. Laser eyes, super speed, telepathy, those could be foreshadowings of the future evolution of the human species. On the other hand, though, they might be atavistic remains from the more primitive conditions of life. We probably needed super speed and psychic intuition more in the ancient predatory jungle than we do in contemporary postmodern societies. Maybe those capacities are being phased out and rendered obsolete by evolution. Maybe psychic powers are a throwback. One time my dad and I went to see a trance medium. I was young enough that my memories are blurry and shaky, but what I remember is this fellow getting correct information he shouldn't have had, but at the same time being one of the most spaced out dysfunctional human beings I'd ever encountered. Maybe his lack of evolution was connected to his capacity to shift into those archaic states. Of course, it's tough enough to tease apart our ancient fantasies of higher powers from our attempts to speculate about higher forms of experience. Probably we all have higher potentials peeking into our lives all the time, but which ones are they? Which little bits of my own experience indicate what I could become, and which ones merely seduce me with their niftiness? In Luc Besson's 2014 sci-fi film Lucy, Scarlett Johansson is smuggling a special drug inside her body when it bursts and starts leaking into her bloodstream, accelerating her brain functioning and her evolutionary development. Apparently, it's an intensified version of a special chemical that energizes fetal development in the womb. It's a certain something we have in our bodies connected to sexual reproduction and development and regeneration of the organism, but which in greater quantities might have special evolutionary effects upon our nervous system. Sound familiar? No? All right. Humorously in that film, they show on screen how much of her brain she's using. The normal 10% gets up to 20%, 50%, which corresponds to her increase in existential powers. Now, we know, of course, it's not really true that we only use 10% of our brains, but it's a good metaphor for our visceral certainty that we have various psychological and physiological capacities that we know damn well we're not activating most of the time. Yes, you're using all your brain all the time, but maybe only 10% as well as you should. Anyway, Lucy first starts getting subtle psychic powers like telepathy, a bit like an altered state. But then the mood of her mutations change. She starts focusing on her new perceptions of the nature of time and the meaning of human existence connected to time. That's more convincingly higher stage-ish. Finally, she identifies with all life, transcends the space-time continuum, and leaves our ordinary notion of singular consciousness far behind as she gains direct access to all digital information patterns, as we all do sometimes.
But not the Jaguar.
Which side are you on, boys? Which side are you on? Which side are you on, boys? Which side are you on? They say in Harlan County there are no neutrals there. You'll either be a Union man or a thug for J.H. Blair. Which side are you on, boys? Which side are you on? Tell me, which side are you on, boys? Which side are you on? My daddy was a miner, and I'm a miner's son. He'll be with you, fellow workers, until this battle's won. Tell me, which side are you on? Which side are you on? Sing it! Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Oh, workers, can you stand it? Tell me how you can. Will you be a lousy scab, or will you be a man? Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Tell me, which side are you on? Which side are you on? Come, all of you good workers, good news to you I'll tell of how the good old Union has come in here to dwell. Tell me, which side are you on, boys? Which side are you on? Tell me, which side are you on, boys? Which side are you on?
That was Pete Seeger. I'm Layman Pascal. This is CILU 102.7 FM, and we were talking about the ending of Luc Besson's film Lucy, the point at which Lucy can directly express herself through electronic technology, sending texts as if out of her essence. That's also kind of what happens at the end of The Lawnmower Man. Remember when the chemically evolved super half-wit gardener finally escapes his electronic prison in that movie and rings every phone in the world at once as the sign of his arising? No. It seems like a lot of movies that speculate about future stages of human development zero in on how we're relating to electronics. It seems to me, though, ambiguous whether the patterns of electronic life are a step forward or a step up or neither. People like John Gebser have laid out systems of history whereby we move through stage-like waves of different sensibilities. In the Renaissance, we suddenly start have good, firm, single-angle perspectives, realistic-looking paintings, classical physics, and the integrity of the author. 20th century art starts to branch out dramatically into a multi-perspectival, cubist, quantum multiverse featuring pluralistic deconstructionism and relativistic consciousness. It's like we're entering a new stage. Not exactly the same way that an individual child goes through stages, but there's a rough analogy there. On the other hand, maybe this new sensibility that overtakes the culture is not another stage of our growth, but only some more contingent nonsense that just happens to be happening. Marshall McLuhan taught us that we start to think like the machines we use. Our communication technology requires us to use our brains in certain patterns that slowly become the patterns for the whole culture if we're all using our brains that way. At first, it's adopted by a vanguard of avant-garde artists who each think they're finding new pathways into a new reality, and then everybody starts going around telling each other the temperature of the new weather system, whether it matters or not. Under electronic conditions, we start to experience ourselves as networks, linguistic programs, electrical energy patterns in a global village and information jungle. Fewer people believe in sacred books, and more people want to see lasers, ripples, force fields, and non-local romantic connections displayed on digital media. That's definitely the new thing. But is it really the next thing? Do we have any way of evaluating that? If I chopped off everyone's hands, then the handless culture would start thriving. Doesn't necessarily mean that handlessness is a sign of the next emergent structural phase of the developmental human being. Now, most 4-year-olds eventually become 10-year-olds. Their ability to follow chains of reference and treat the world as a stable, nuanced thing takes a quantum leap. But if I start feeding my 4-year-old diet soda until she's 200 pounds of flubber, that's a change, but it's not exactly the same kind of change. It's a new phase of her life, but it's not the next stage of her development. It's only what's happened to her next. So which one is electronic technology? Is it a horizontal rearrangement of our thought patterns, which naturally assumes that it's the new thing? Do all the digitally invoked ways of thinking and feeling which have been crafting our civilization for the past 150 years actually mean nothing in terms of our development? Or maybe even pose an obstruction or a regression of our development? It's darn hard to say. Bruce E. Kinesis from Do Make Say Think. If I sound a little different today, it's because I'm delirious and sweating and being held together mostly by gumption and ibuprofen. But what I want to know is, what even is a stage of development? We often say that stages are emergent. That makes us sound sciencey. Emergence is the science of how a whole bunch of things can get perturbed in just the right way and become a whole new thing. There didn't used to be atoms, if our current cosmology is correct. It actually took a long time for bunches of quarks and other bunches of quarks to snag some electrons into a recurring metastable pattern that has the qualities and capacities that are not found in quarks and electrons, that can do only the things atoms can do, that things quarks can't do. I'm gibberish. Cells do things that atoms do not do, and sharks do things that the molecules of sharks cannot even conceive of doing, and I should know. Some of my best friends are shark molecules. Bunch of damned shark molecules. Anyway, unpredictable new orders of reality emerge from what already exists. They do this under certain conditions. You need the right energy, the right interconnections, the right balance of order and chaos, and the new thing can't just be anything. It has to be only the kinds of things that could hold together, survive, feed, and solve and account for the gaps in the previous thing that it emerged out of. The instability of the previous system may force an experimental chaos that keeps going until it stabilizes in a way which integrates the instability of the previous stability. Duh. A new stage solves some of the problems, but it might also invent some other problems we hadn't foreseen. Industrial production solves a bunch of our starvation problems that could not really be figured out by warring dogmatic racist kingdoms without motors. But modernity also seems to contribute to some kind of mass climate instability. Mo changes, mo problems. What do we really know about these stages? Are they just a bunch of damned shark molecules? Yeah, you heard me. Are they emergent surprises? Really? Do they come out of nowhere? Have they never been seen in the universe before? Or actually, are they built in from the beginning? Human babies come preloaded with the capacity to mutate into language users during a certain window. But we also think that capacity evolved slowly in our ancestors over millions of years. Was it a totally new surprise back in the day, and we eventually compressed it down and got so good at it we're practically born with it? Is that a thing? Can we get so good at something that we're almost born with it? Have the neo-Darwinists and neo-Lamarckians come to an agreement about that yet? Or maybe all of the stages were there all along because all patterns were always there and we just didn't know how to get at them except at the right moment when our pre-existing structure was in the right pattern. A lot of it, I think, depends on whether Earth is normal or Earth is weird. If there are lots and lots of other planets in the infinite universe with biospheres and brains all over them coming and going, then maybe this kind of stuff happens all the time. Maybe what seems like a surprise in the history of the terrestrial biosphere has occurred endless numbers of times already, as predictable as the growth cycle of flowers in a garden. On the other hand, if there's never been a planet with sapient noospheric beings on it before, then we're just improvising all this stuff, and the universe has never seen anything like this before. But on the other hand, maybe all possible patterns of every degree of complexity are already implicit within the ubiquitously distributed syntactical web of computational logic, and every emergence is actually just the local dialing in of a pattern of complexity from out of that syntactical web that has existed since the forever. If you think you know which one the answer is, call in now and you'll be entered to win a trip for two to sunny Acapulco. The number to call is...
Miles below, I hear the roar.
That was the Blue Peter. I'm Layman Pascal on CILU. And speaking of acronyms, MHC stands for Major Histocompatibility Complex. That means the genes that determine which things you'll have different kinds of histamine reactions to. Histocompatibility. Histamine is how we get allergic reactions or how your body refuses an organ transplant. It's also important in how we wake up in the morning or become physiologically aroused. Antihistamines or antihistamines, whichever you prefer, can combat skin rashes, sneezing, watery eyes, and even act as a sleep aid, but too many of them and you might become a lethargic lump of listlessness. Yuck. Fortunately, MHC also stands for the model of hierarchical complexity, a very general scheme of developmental stages developed by the very uncommon Mr. Michael Commons. The MHC describes organisms, cognitive development, computer brains, societies, anything. It describes how things can make use of their own bits self-referentially. Every new layer can make use of the previous bits. Sentences use words, arguments use sentences. Judiciously comparing arguments has to use arguments for its judicious comparing. Just like when my organism does a cartwheel, all the organs are needed and they come along. The body can perform a meta-organ process provided it has organs already. Of course, this kind of increase in referential complexity doesn't tell us much about getting healthier or how to move more harmoniously through life, combining our parts together to have meaning. It's just that we gain new levels of technical potential in terms of the patterns we can recognize and exploit. Possibly better to be a healthy, happy level 4 than a partially realized, depressive, superficial level 9, right? Is healthy and happy its own thing unrelated to developmental complexity? What about meaning or beingness? Are these states or stages or something else? No, don't tell me, I'm keen to guess. Thanks, you folks, for listening to Altered States and Altered Stages on the Cinematic Asylum on CILU 102.7 FM and luradio.ca. I'm Layman Pascal, and I know it's been pretty abstract and philosophically intensive today, and now you deserve a break. Go dunk your head in some ice water or rub penguin grease on yourself or do whatever it is that you do to calm down your cognitive machinery. I've been handed a note here to give special thanks for musical requests to Mr. Bruce Alderman, who hates the people of Nepal. That might actually be a typo. I think Bruce probably loves the people of Nepal. It's hard to read this note, but maybe it's both. Maybe the Nepalese inherently provoke strong, ambivalent, and contradictory emotional reactions in people. Is that true? If you know the answer, call in now. That trip for two to Acapulco is standing by, and the number is...
Got another girl. He might be fucking her right now. I don't have an apartment. Thought if I was smart I'd make it far, but I'm still at the start. Guess I'm contagious. It'd be safest if you ran. Fuck, that's what they all just end up doing in the end. Take my car and paint it black. Take my arm, break it in half. Say something, do it soon. It's too quiet in this room. I need noise.
CILU is